Welcome back, everyone. We're going to look at a few expanded ideas of how to address nuanced details inside of map design. Let's take a look at example this larger map that has a general floor plan that has maybe some details inside of a space that we want to clarify later. So if I look at this map and I take off all the guides, I can see that the floor plan makes sense. I can construct the walls, but I don't have any details about what goes inside. So maybe I have some cursory details that would be able to exist in this outer area, but this inner area is where a focus of gameplay the player needs to go to and experience a specific event occurs. So what I might do is have this dotted line on the outside, and I would label this as manager's office or something like that. And then I would have a manager's office breakout map separately where it's the same floor plan. It's a section of that map. And then I would provide the additional detail about all the layouts and pieces and parts that go into it. And so if you want to, you can get fancy with smart objects and X references inside of Photoshop, but really it's nice to just have a second map to be able to open up and make edits to. So just copying that original information over, putting it into a new map, and then making sure that your details for like wall size and grid size are adjusted for that new map space. Looking over elevation, one of the trickiest things to convey inside of a 2D map, often people will look to gradation. Using a granular gradient, something that's smooth, will allow you to show that something transitions evenly between two areas. Typically, you're going to have a linear gradient. Those are great for ramps, but when you have things that are not connected, like here, if we had jumping platforms, the player started off on a low platform, jumped up again, down, up again, and up to a higher point, then the color gradient or stepped gradient is going to be more appropriate here. And then in your legend, you would just label these with the particular heights that each one represented. Now, this works to an extent, but once you have more elevations to depict, it can become problematic, possibly requiring separate maps to be able to clearly articulate the distinction between these things, or directly labeling on the map what the elevation is of a particular height of object. Now, this is in grayscale. That can be hard to interpret if you have other details drawn on there. So some people might be inclined to use a color gradient. A step gradient for color is fine if you have a few selections. But as you were to go up, if you find that these are problematic to distinguish if you're staying within a single color band, it would be helpful to be able to go into a chromatic progression where you have the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, stepping through the colors of the rainbow to be able to do this. Now, this color banding is actually quite intense for the eye, so what you may want to do is take these down and maybe drop the opacity, and then have these go on top of whatever details are inside of the space or sit behind the furniture, something like that. But just be mindful that the color step gradient, it works really well, but when you use it at full intensity or you use very vibrant versions of those colors, they can become abrasive to look at, especially for a long period of time. And if you have a lot of other color-coded iconography on side of the map, that can be difficult to interpret and cause a little bit of eye strain. Some other considerations is if you have details inside of a map and you want to have an alternate view, sometimes it's good. You have the top-down space and you want to be able to translate that to a different view. Maybe I want to see the front of this building as opposed to just the top of whatever, this office bed dorm space. We have a tactic that we can use that's directly from architecture, and it's called a miter. So when we have a miter, you're just talking about a 45-degree angle. So a miter line, from an architect's perspective, allows us to take details, and we get to place an object inside of that space, and they get to be projected onto the miter line and then down into the other view. So if I have a detail for like how big this table is, I can take a line and I can drop these here to get a reference of how the table is going to fit within inside of this space. I need to define how tall that table is. And once I define how tall that table is, then of course I can project that detail over here. But where does this table live inside of this view? So if I were to just create we'll say an empty object here with a thin line. So if I say that the table is going to exist somewhere over here, right? I don't know where in this image to put it. So what I can do is take a horizontal line, place it here at the top of the table, and another horizontal guide at the bottom. And you'll see that these intersect my miter line over here. So I'll take a vertical one and align it to the miter line here, another one here, and now I have the exact dimensions of where that table sits inside of that room. So This can be helpful for translating details to different views. So if I wanted the side view rather than the front view, I can get the exact positioning of where that is, and then I can use this image as part of my map or as part of a breakout or contextualizing annotation. It just gives us some more options about how to accurately represent things. And of course, the grid for these should be the same. So if I build the grid, 1 unit on this map should equal 1 unit on this map. And that's how translation works with the 45-degree angle. If you wanted to scale them up, then you can start to use angled lines. But for the most part, a miter at 45 is what you're looking for. This is all well and good for interior structured rigid architecture, but when we go out into a more organic shape, this can be a little problematic. So if we look at a shape, this is more of a topographical map where we have elevation that's set aside. We have these perimeter lines that are going to define certain elevations. We can take these and start to colorize the stroke base. So if I went to the mid tiers and colorize these, and then I went to the peaks and I colorized these, right? I have a representation of elevation for these things. Now this is good if I have a legend, and the assumption is that there's an even linear distribution between any orange point and any red point. So if I know that orange is 300 and red is 0, that halfway between this point and this point is going to be 150, and halfway between this point and this point is going to be 150. So you can get a gradient to fill in here, but this would be a clear way for the designer to get a picture of this. We can apply our same miter principle to get different profile views of this environment. But with these lines, you have to have an understanding of what that space looks like. So sometimes you would end up with a top-down view. You can export a height map from within Engine if you want to play with one of the landscape tools, and then you can take that into Photoshop and colorize it that way, or take a sectional view and then lay those on top of each other. There's a lot of other ways to generate this type of tool, or this type of view. With these, you probably also want to attribute an in-map view so people can start to conceptualize without having to jump back and forth to the key. And so inside of Photoshop, it may be worthwhile just to take your text tool. If you have a particular line selected, you can hover over that and you see the text tool. When I press T, when I hover over it, gives me that little squiggly line. That'll let me type on top of this. And I can say this is, what, 600. And you can move that around. If I have the control tool, I can change where that sits on side of that and even put it into, let's see, into the inside. Some finagling may be needed. But you have the start and end 600. I can come over to the West Peak and then do the same thing. And so this will allow for someone to look at the map and get a immediate read on what the elevation is, and then they can use the color coding to interpret and follow that line as they go to look at other details. Typically, when you present these details, we want to have them aligned almost in the same region. So like the 600, 300, and then if I were to come down to the base, I would come down here and say 0. And we probably might want to, unit these as we go through in case there's any confusion. Depending on the consistency that you're using, this type of formatting, that may not be necessary. But the idea that you're applying these level details to allow whoever's reading the map to easily and clearly discern what it is that's being conveyed inside. Hopefully this will give you an idea of some things that you can do to be able to generate more details inside of a map. We have, a compound set of tools now. If I wanted to take this, I can zoom out, I can create a new guide layout. We'll do this, and then I can draw a new line. And we'll just take it from midpoint to here. I now have a miter line, and I can project the details of this map into my side view, and I can take those down and generate a profile view from the side, and I can project these straight down and get the front view, the elevation view, to show these details. So I can mix and match these toolkits, generate a lot of different detail. Depending on what your map needs, you won't need to apply all of these tactics. They're just different resources in your tool belt to be able to properly articulate the level of detail that you have. So I hope it gets you where you need to be. I hope you go out there and keep building.